word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. It's the 17th of October 2015. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. And today I'm going to play something that I found. Richard Grove, tragedyandhope.com. Usually you might think of Carol Quigley, but this is a website, tragedyandhope.com. I advise everybody to go there, check it out. There's a lot of interesting stuff. And it's also related to Peace Revolution. It's a podcast. This is from number 89. And let's see if I can find it's not Habits of Freedom. Oh well, you'll have to excuse me for not knowing the title. And we're already 1 hour and 2 minutes into it. These podcasts that Richard Grove makes are long. This one is 20 hours. I've listened to many of his Peace Revolution podcasts. Most of them are like 8 hours or 13 hours. You know, you really need some take some time. I usually do a couple of days to listen to one, and they're always of a very high standard of quality. And I thought I would just do this for this week, and we'll see what we do next week. Alright, so here we go. Richard Grove, Tragedy and Hope.
Jade Helm 15, a military exercise of grand scale. The military claims the exercise is for overseas training, yet 3 of these United States have been listed as hostile. The term Mastering the Human Domain reveals to us that Jade Helm 15 is more than just a military exercise. It's also an exercise of the new field of geospatial intelligence, using human domain analytics to map the politics and thoughts of any nation, state, city, right down to the individual.
Jade Helm 15. That's what the United States Army is calling a large-scale military exercise. Special Operations Command will be training with other armed units beginning in July.
In a recent Infowars.com report, Master the Human Domain, the domestic plan behind Jade Helm, we break down what the Jade Helm logo refers to. In brief, a new discipline in intelligence has been at center stage for the past decade, activity-based intelligence, or ABI. According to TrajectoryMagazine.com, the human domain, or human dimension, which is a vital and integral part of ABI, is defined as the presence, activities, including transactions, both physical and virtual, culture, social structure, organization, networks and relationships, motivations, intent, vulnerabilities, and capabilities of humans, single or groups, across all domains of the operational environment, space, air, maritime, ground, and cyber. This article goes on to say that the focus on mastering the human domain was born out of a merging of three already existing disciplines of intelligence. That may be the case for this branding of this idea, but the exercise of mapping the human domain right down to the individual is a long-standing institutionalized strategy that has been going on for well over 100 years. What reason would the United States government have to invest so much time, resources, and money in order to pinpoint exact pockets of thought in a country founded on free thought, expression, and most of all, outspoken words against its own government? During his famous farewell address, Eisenhower warned the American people of an imminent and internal threat, a scientific elite.
We must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
The title, scientific elite, to most Americans might seem like nothing more than ordinary intangible rhetoric, typically thrown around by politicians during their speeches. This time, however, Eisenhower was not speaking in abstractions. There actually is a scientific elite. Jade Helm 15 is anything but the American way. It's a domestic scientific control grid whose purpose is domination and control. A technological infrastructure for authoritarian political control is not the end goal, but a means to that end of eugenics. The term eugenics, coined by Charles Darwin's half-cousin, Sir Francis Galton, in 1883, is a science dedicated to the engineering of the human genome by selectively breeding those humans with what they consider to be desirable qualities, such as intelligence, athleticism, etc., and eliminating those humans without these attributes and all races of humans unlike their own. Out of this, race theory and race science was born. Carl Pearson, a protege of Galton, assembled a biometrics laboratory based out of the University of London in 1907 in order to collect data about people mostly based on race. He also published a journal entitled Biometrica, which became very influential with American scientists and financiers who were becoming extremely interested in the concept of eugenics. As this movement grew in popularity, top American industrialists threw their money into the game. Carnegie, Harriman, and Rockefeller were among the top contributors. California became the eugenics capital of the world, while on the East Coast, Cold Spring Harbor Research Facility, located on Long Island, was collecting and storing biometric information on average Americans in order to begin the elimination of families, as well as entire races of people. Through the efforts of the California eugenicists, mostly through written pamphlets and endowments mostly from the Rockefellers and Harriman, the eugenics movement found a second home in Germany in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. This pre-World War II, well-funded international scientific community based around the eugenics movement was cementing its place as a standard in human academia when World War II broke out in full scale. The then CEO of IBM, Thomas J. Watson, worked hand in hand with Nazi Germany. In 1933, it was Watson who enthusiastically helped the Nazi plan and funded their national census, which, according to historian Edwin Black in his 2001 publication, IBM and the Holocaust, the 1933 census, with design help and tabulation services provided by IBM through its German subsidiary, proved to be pivotal to the Nazis in their efforts to identify, isolate, and ultimately destroy the country's Jewish, Gypsy, and other minority communities, as well as single out political opposition. While much of the world was forever altered by the events of the war, this eugenics-based community remained together. A similar and frighteningly more advanced version of this eugenics-based biometrics program is being tested right now under the name Jade Helm 15. While the term eugenics is no longer used in the mainstream openly, the practice of eugenics is still around and stronger than ever. Jade Helm 15 exercises the next generation of technology in the political domination arena. It is simply another technological step beyond the Cold Springs Harbor Research Facility's biometrics program or Thomas J. Watson's census of Germany. and their disciplines developed during the eugenics heyday in the early 20th century are still being practiced and advanced today. Mandatory toxic vaccines, abortion, family courts, contaminated water, and of course biometrics are just a few of the branches that grew out of the original eugenics trunk, still present and dominating over our society today. In 2010, the GeoInt Symposium, an annual geointelligence, geospatial, and activity-based intelligence conference, held a presentation entitled Mastering the Human Domain. Geospatial intelligence and human geography were the main talking points. Jade Helm is born and begins to take form. The human domain encompasses the totality of the physical, cultural, and social environments that influence human behavior, explained Admiral McRaven. Success in this domain won't be achieved by traditional ground, naval, or air forces. Instead, success in the human domain will depend upon understanding the human terrain and establishing trust with those individuals who occupy that space.
The goal is to see if groups of these special forces can move around the civilian population without being noticed, blend in so they can place themselves in strategic positions.
McRaven continued by saying, building understanding of the human domain requires boots on the ground, feeding information into the network. A living active map where human beings are movable real-time landmarks and everyone's personal thoughts, feelings, medical information, belief systems, history, basically every shred of information about the individuals in any region on that map will make up the terrain. When mastering the human domain, the special operators are the masters. They are the key that turns this whole machine on. And regardless of whether the military calls this project Activity-Based Intelligence, ABI, geospatial intelligence, coupled with human domain analytics, what we are looking at is a nexus between private tech firms, homeland security and law enforcement, domestic surveillance, and the domestic use of special forces. How is any of this legal? How is any of this not a violation of the Fourth Amendment? A tech startup, Recorded Future, that uses a system of filtering through and classifying open source data, demonstrated their predictive analytics capability during the 2012 GeoInt conference. Trajectory magazine reports, the concept is to find people who are talking about the future. Vice President for Recorded Future, Matt Kodima, says, we can basically roll back the clock. We know that this particular did happen in this time at this place. Now let's go back a week before that and look at the publications. Who was predicting that accurately? Who wasn't? Add this layer of predictive analytics on top of the other human domain analytic, and you begin to get an idea of the scope and range of the overarching, inescapable control grid these scientific controllers are constructing. At the same GeoInt conference in 2012, Jeff Jonas, the chief scientist for IBM Entity Analytics and an IBM fellow, talked about the potential for open source data utilization. He said, in typical IBM tradition, space, time, travel data is the ultimate biometric. It seems that IBM and the scientific elite's perspective shifted from the master race to mastering the human domain. So we probably won't see doors kicked in and military trucks shipping political opponents to their demise during this summer's Jade Helm 15 military procedure. However, as Brzezinski states in Between Two Ages, the technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Just like Watson's census was not the end sought by the Nazis, neither is Jade Helm 15 an end, but a means to a historically predictable end.
We also want to recognize that the only reason we're able to be here today is because of those few, those brave, those reasonable people who see what we're doing and they're like, look, everyone else doesn't catch on to it yet, but if I support them until those other people catch on, those people who catch on are going to be really appreciative that so much has been done and they just became aware and now they're, trying to get and take action. That we've been consistent the whole time, and it's like regardless of whether or not there's some donations coming in or there's not, it doesn't really change our activities. We are still doing what we're doing because we feel strongly in our hearts that it's the right thing to do at this point in history, given the extensive amount of information and credible evidence that paints this out. And backed by the fact that our education system was undermined, backed by the fact that the media from whom everyone is taking their so-called news is part and parcel with the same group trying to internationalize America and change the attitudes, behaviors, values, and beliefs of everyone in it without their knowledge. I'm saying if what they're doing is so good, why can't they do it out in the open? I'm saying if what they're doing is so good, why do they have to lie to us? Because if we knew the truth, we would effectively resist as individuals. And that's what they don't want. They need individuals under control as a herd. Otherwise, they can't really manage us effectively. We become too expensive to keep as livestock.
Right.
So I think it's first recognizing that the reason that we've gotten this far, the reason I've gotten 10 years into this, is because listeners and viewers have appreciated it to the point where they took action. They felt a responsibility to, make sure it keeps coming if they want to continue to, learn and nurture themselves in this field. I'm not saying, I'm giving you the power directly. I'm saying here's a field, and if you go there, there's a whole bunch of fruit and vegetables and things that will empower and feed your mind. It's about cooking up nutritious meals for the mind in an environment that doesn't seem to think very much of everyone else's mind because they treat everyone like they're stupid. So I take the appreciation very seriously, every penny that comes in, because that allows me to keep doing what I'm doing. I also struggle with the fact that I am working with a bunch of independent media hosts who, of our own volition, everyone working in their individual way, are trying to do the same thing. We are exemplifying and learning day by day, and we're living the values that we espouse. But I see a lot of people struggling with revenues. And I don't think any of us want our families to go without because of what we've had to do during this time. So I think if it's beneficial and other people are avoiding these pitfalls in their life, then it's at least worth considering to be able to support any of the independent media hosts who are doing something similar to what we're doing.
One of the big explorations that's been built into School Sucks projects since the beginning, you asked about, is there a market demand for what we're doing? So one of the inquiries has been, why is the market demand so small for what we're doing? If you look at the big picture, that question answers itself. It is
freedom's an emerging market, sadly, at this point.
Exactly, an emerging market at this point. All of these explorations, this critical thing, these are things that are schooled out of people. And then what's schooled out of them, that state is reinforced by the way the media work today. So there's a lot of people waking up, as Rich said, emerging, saying, wait a minute, no, that's bullshit. I want those parts of me to be alive. And they start looking for these things. But who gets to them first? So, I've been trying to live more consciously and look at some of my habits more closely. How do I spend my downtime? How do I look for information on the internet? And one of the realizations that I've had, as hard as I work in some respects, I can be pretty damn lazy sometimes. And then I start saying, well, how many other people are like this? Life is pretty busy. And sometimes I'm going and typing things into Google because I want all the answers immediately, So Rich had a brilliant statement earlier where he was talking about how he built his audience. Well, if you put out a 14-hour podcast, simply put, you're going to get the people with the longest attention spans. And there's something desirable because, what Rich is putting forward, it requires that, I think of people who are going to get the most out of that information. I want people who, and we all do, obviously we all want this, but I want people who are willing to think, who are willing to work, who are willing to be taken out of their comfort zones. But then there's that question and I found a lot of those people, and like Rich said, I'm really, really grateful that they've embraced what I do, that they contribute what I do. It's the only reason I'm still doing it. But how many people like that are there? And how can we make more of them, right? That's the real question. And I think a big part of it is finding bedrock. It's hard to build anything in quicksand. That goes to these projects, that goes to the individual, right? We're not building powerful political movements if people haven't, taken care of their own side of the street first. I've certainly learned that over and over again in my life, trying to direct my attention outside of myself before I was ready to do that, before I had much else to offer. So, there is this problem of getting a kind of stability first. And I think, I'm starting to realize as much as I've hesitated wanting to play the marketing game, I really need to have a very specific niche, and I need to attract as many people into that as possible. And gosh, I hate to say it, but just continue to encourage those people to buy in to what we're doing and to help build it up. So that's a project in the works. But for me, I think that's the only, because those are the people, like the people who are already excited, the people who are already motivated, they're the ones who are going to take what you do and share it with 10 people. They're the ones who are going to blast out what you do on Facebook to everybody. So nurturing those relationships, and not just from the sense of like, oh, I see you're a hot target, but like really appreciating those people and building that into your thinking. Ernie, I just built a new studio. I was going to write to like 25 people that I could name off right now who I would just describe as super fans. You know, they've just been so helpful. They've been so supportive. They've you know, done anything that I could ask of anybody. I don't even like calling them fans, right? Because they're kind of that, they're the strong pieces in that bedrock that I'm trying to build. And I was going to send them messages and just say, hey, can I put up pictures of you on the wall that I face while I record? Not to be creepy, but just to be reminded that the people that I'm looking for are out there. And I think that would be a nice thing. I think a lot of the struggle comes from my attitude. You know, I mentioned these cynical parts, these resentful parts, these poor me parts that all exist and have these voices. And, you know, I try to shout them down with more constructive, more reflective, other voices. But, you know, hearing them and then just trying to, I don't know, continuously make an effort to improve my attitude. You know, there is something about doing this that's like, there is, you know, after all this schooling, it's like, you're not supposed to be doing that. You're supposed to have a job, you know, you're supposed to be contributing to society. Like, that's all silly. But, you know, those lessons, I think I've overcome them. But it doesn't mean there isn't still this touch of emotion that exists sometimes that's affecting my attitude in a negative way. So for me, it's very personal what I'm doing. Now, there obviously are constructive actions that I can take that are going to affect other people, but for me, it really starts with my attitude.
You know, I'm so scattered on so many things because I see the opportunity to inspire people on so much stuff. That's why I can focus on one thing, you know, and make that more successful than the tapestry that I try to create, the net, you know, that we're doing, because I'm kind of the mindset that Richard is that freedom is a growing market. I mean, it's you see it everywhere, and it's going to be who's left standing. It's going to go. You know, I give this one example when a couple of things. One was when my kids were growing up, I try and do a word picture, emphasize personality, character traits that they should have. And I gave them an example. I said, look, I put a hole in this wall and it's only about, you know, a half inch around, and I have a twine that comes out, and you just keep pulling that twine. At the end of that twine is a car. I mean, you know, keep pulling that twine. It could be miles long for all they know. I'm just, who's got the persistence to pull that? I've had a promised result at the end of the work of all this time. You do sit there and just be a big giant pile. Who's going to stop? And you don't know when you stop, and all of a sudden there's only 3 feet left. Damn it! If you know at the end of the twine there is freedom, there is understanding, there is the life that we want to advocate. If you know that, how do you stop pulling on the cord? You know, I'm just like, no, I know it's at the end. No, I just got to stay involved. Just keep going, because I know I win at the end. I win for who? You know, for my children, I hope, grandchildren. I'm just not going to stop pulling because I know what's at the end of it. I just have to survive it.
There is a peaceful solution called peace revolution. Now let's take back America.
Welcome to the Peace Revolution podcast. I am your host and navigator, Richard Grove, and this is where we step out of the confusion, fear, and anxiety of everyday life to relax into some knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. You're listening to Podomatic's #1 rated podcast in higher education. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule to tune in and grow in the right direction.
Peace Revolution and all the educational media we create here at TragedyandHope.com is offered as a public service, funded by individuals, published commercial-free, and presented free to the public. Thanks to the generosity of the subscribers to the Tragedy and Hope online community and the diligent work of the independent media hosts featured at TragedyandHope.com. For those of you who listen to this podcast but aren't yet a current member of the Tragedy and Hope online research community, it's our offering to individuals who seek a broader and deeper understanding of the topics covered in Peace Revolution episodes. It's also a way of sharing relevant and timely information with others who are serious about learning our way out of the ever-increasing despotism we're encountering on a daily basis around the world. In the time that's elapsed since the last episode of this podcast, I've published several video projects in the Tragedy and Hope community, including my interviews with Ernest Hancock of Freedom's Phoenix and Charles Goyette on his Ron Paul film, as well as my filming of Adam Kokesh's Campfire Freedom Tour lecture in Tampa, Florida. While I was down there interviewing John Loftus over 2 days, it just might be a longer session that I did with Loftus than I did with John Taylor Gatto in the Ultimate History Lesson. There's about a half a terabyte of raw video footage for that Loftus interview, so that's going to take some time to get through post-production. In the meanwhile, I'm also working on finishing the editing of the 3-hour interview I did with Patrick Wood on his book Technocracy Rising, and several other projects that I've filmed since last episode. To facilitate your viewing of these new features, I created a new playlist on my YouTube page. It's linked in the notes for this episode. That'll hold my interviews for the Future of Freedom documentary film project that I've been working on for the past year. So as I finish interviews, that playlist is likely the best place to find them. The process of making a film usually leaves most of the interview footage left on the cutting room floor, but I think that's a waste of time, materials, energy, and knowledge, so that's why I release the entire interview as soon as I finish the edit. That way you get exponentially more information from the interviewee, and there's something for folks to dig into after they see the final film and would like to know more. More on that project in a few minutes. Last but not least, in the way of productions since last episode, for members of the History So It Doesn't Repeat group within the Tragedy and Hope research community, I've just finished uploading my April 23rd, 2015 interview with John Taylor Gatto, which is a very candid 1.5-hour video session where he shares his enthusiasm for his current projects and expresses his sincere gratitude to those of you who have come to his aid most recently. We also visited John again in May, so I've got that interview footage to edit as well. And we plan to travel back to New York City in mid-July to check back in with him. Not long after I finished episode 88, Lisa and I flew to Phoenix, where we stayed with Ernie and Donna Hancock for a week in order to interview Patrick Wood. There's a 4-hour video of our appearance on Ernie's show, which I filmed with GoPro Cam, and it's hosted and posted in the History group. So if you want to see Lisa's TSA experiences, that's where you can find that bit of tenacity. Ernie and Donna were kind enough to include us in all of their productions that week, so we got to meet people like Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers. I got to sit down with Charles Goyette, not only for his interview, but to interview him after the show. He was promoting his Ron Paul documentary project, a project which, while well-planned, was jettisoned early because of low donations on his Kickstarter project. While at Casa de Hancock, Ernie and Donna also hosted a get-together where we got to meet Peace Revolution listeners local to Arizona. And that was truly an inspiring pleasure to be able to put faces with some of the names from you folks in the community. I truly appreciated that opportunity to have conversations, to meet your families, and to be inspired by how smart you guys are. We came back here to Connecticut for a week or so, and then we flew to Tampa, Florida to interview John Loftus. John was a former attorney in the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations. You've heard John's work recently in Peace Revolution episodes, and what you heard was just the tip of the iceberg. Having read all of his books over the years, I knew that if I could just get some of his research to be talked about on film, it could have an immense effect on helping others to realize the state of tyranny we're in, how we got here, and with that knowledge, we could figure out how to revive freedom before it's officially pronounced dead by the technocrats. While in Tampa, Lisa and I were hosted by my buddy Sean, a longtime friend who happens to be battling stage 4 prostate cancer. on top of balancing being a single dad. Now, that's no easy task, but he does it with poise, and his son is remarkably well adjusted and thriving intellectually. So as far as I'm concerned, he's doing the impossible every day and continuing to live life to its fullest. It was tragic to see a friend in the midst of a battle for his life, and yet inspiring at the same time to see how one can deal with such adversity gracefully and live freely despite the fear of the unknown. We all made the best of good company, and Lisa and I made ourselves useful and helped out in every way we could while we waited for the final confirmation from John. I helped Sean whittle down his considerable pile of computer problems, and I began to wonder if the interview with John was going to happen or not. We had planned for Thursday at 2 p.m., and that came and went with no word. In the meanwhile, at least, I had thought to introduce Sean to Chris Emery of Free Mind Films, who had just moved to Tampa a few weeks ago. Chris said they had just released their new film Shadow Ring, which includes Adam Kokesh, and that Kokesh happened to be speaking about 30 minutes away from where we were staying. Needless to say, lovers of freedom can't resist a ride to see what Adam's Campfire Freedom Tour is like, so we all met up at the outdoor venue, and I happened to take along a camera so I could film Adam's speech. I figured since I had lugged nearly 150 pounds of camera equipment down in the form of lights, cameras, 3 tripods, all these other things that I had to carry, that I should at least put it to work. And I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that I felt like at least if John Loftus was a no-show for the interview, that I filmed something worth preserving that week and something worth sharing with you. Finally, on Friday morning, we got a call from John saying he had mixed up the dates of our being in Tampa, but that he was available in 2 hours. So Lisa drove down to John's house in St. Petersburg, brought him back to Sean's, where we filmed Friday afternoon into the wee hours of the evening. Finding that I had only gotten about halfway through with the chronological outline of the story laid out through John's various books, I asked Sean on the side, it's like, hey, can we film here Saturday and leave the cameras all set up? He agreed. And I asked John if we could pick him up on Saturday and bring him back for another session, and he agreed. And boy, am I glad that I didn't try to squeeze it all into one session, because I think that it's the context provided by the second day of filming which helps to align all the facts into a coherent and substantial narrative about the nature of freedom and how it's being destroyed by lies from the last century, hoping to morph into a global government before it's discovered and dealt with. So that's why we've traveled more in the past month than we have in the past 10 years, and that's what I've been doing in the past month, aside from editing footage and researching for this episode, which I hope to have finished before we leave for the Porcupine Freedom Festival, aka PorcFest, in New Hampshire in the next few hours. I'll be shooting several more interviews at PorcFest, as it is a hub for free-thinking individuals here in New England and draws folks from all over the country who are really, really interesting. So I'm hoping to bump into you if you are listening to this podcast. Speaking of this podcast, we entered into today's episode with the words of Frederick Bastiat from his 1850 book titled The Law. Funny how words from way back then still echo today with truth. Might they be worth checking out in more depth? We'll see. After Bastiat, we heard a sample of the Twilight Zone episode from decades ago called The Obsolete Man, which led us into the notion of individual rights and the 800-year history of Magna Carta Libertatum, or the Great Charter of Liberties, a notion which at the time only applied to barons until the Declaration of Independence and eventually the Constitution and Bill of Rights in America reflected these ideas of protecting the individual from the state. From that clip, I then sought to juxtapose that notion to the notion of individual rights and lex rex, or the law being king, as opposed to an actual monarch or oligarchy, by including this thing called the Princeton study that shows that there's no causal connection between the will of individuals in this country and the actions being taken by government. Now, assuming that point was well taken, I cut back to the Bastiat quote, wherein he discusses the absence of law leading to plunder, by the fact that the law can be used to destroy the purposes for which the law exists. I then felt it was appropriate to cut to someone explaining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I found Robert Reich giving his 2-minute summary of the adverse effects which spells out the end of individual rights having anything to do with anything, as it will yield a world of technocratic tyranny wielded by a multinational conglomerate of corporations who have already entangled billions of individuals into their web. At that point, I called on Rand Paul, and by the way, I don't vote, and I'm not promoting Rand Paul for president. However, I do feel that he occasionally breathes life into certain areas of freedom which are worth listening to for our consideration. In this particular sample, we heard him comparing today's world to the fictitious world of Orwell's 1984, which has now become technologically possible and ongoing. In the face of that technocratic control grid being an actual aspect of our ongoing society, I felt the need to bounce back to Magna Carta and its history here in America. I did so thanks to the help of David Knight at InfoWars in his recent special report on that topic. I then pulled a clip out of Rand Paul's filibuster where he talks about the warrantless wiretapping by NSA and its relationship to the Patriot Act, which of course is predicated on 9/11, so we'll get to that in a minute. But that led us into NATO's rollout of Jade Helm-type drills in Europe. So while we're being attacked on a legal level, where they're spying on us, invading our privacy, doing these things that are kind of in the realm of abstracts, they're also rolling out these drills, which, as you heard, is about controlling and dominating the human landscape. And this is an example of a specific that's going on out there. So they're messing with the abstracts, they're messing with the specifics, and in the middle, they're taking our freedom. The next clip I played was about Stockholm Syndrome, and that was really just in case there was any statists listening. That was for you. And in case that irony didn't arrive, we then heard Winston Smith reading Hillary Clinton's campaign platform. Oh, sorry. Orwell's 1984 was just the inspiration for her candidacy. Striving for accuracy here. The point of this introductory montage is that as tyranny gets darker, the sparks of freedom burn brighter. And so today's episode is composed to contrast the light and the dark, so that we can all see clearly where we want to go in the future. On one hand, we have tyranny, better organized and funded than ever before. And on the other hand, we have individuals discovering their own cognitive abilities to outgrow the status quo. And we're better armed than ever before with the ever-increasing abilities of technology to level the playing field as far as communication and education goes. We can outsmart those who seek to destroy individual liberty, but only if we're well supplied for the endeavors which lead us to victory. Moving forward in this episode, we're going to focus on the art of freedom, i.e., what it takes for individuals to be free, to be their own boss, and to provide a useful and necessary service to those seeking to unlock their own potential. And we're going to look into the heart of darkness that is the bureaucratic elements, which manifest in the form of authorities, with monopolies on force, which are now being aimed at innocent individuals around the world. And immediately following this introductory monologue, you'll have the opportunity to sit in on a call I did recently with Brett Veinotte of the School Sucks podcast and Ernest Hancock, host of Declare Your Independence and co-founder, of course, of Freedom's Phoenix. After that discussion, I'll be featuring my 1-hour Q&A with Ernie, just so you have the opportunity to get to know him outside of his bombastic broadcasting tendencies when doing his show. Following Ernie, I'm going to include the speech that Adam Kokesh gives to each audience stop on his Campfire Freedom Tour. And that rounds out the art of freedom from an individual perspective. On the state perspective, I've embedded an audio version of Bastiat's The Law to serve as a front porch to the building which was structured by Rand Paul in his recent 10-hour filibuster, which I watched live. I stopped what I was doing because I thought it served as a remarkable and important milestone in America's history. And that's why I'm including it here. It's indicating a decision point for individuals as to what we'll tolerate in the form of long trains of abuses that are being handed down these days. Given the law and the fact that freedom is based on non-aggression coupled with intellectual and physical self-defense, I also wanted to include Tom Wood's recent episode on conscientious objectors. And I also wanted to add a little bit of historical perspective in the form of a film called Sir, No Sir, which documents the history of how individuals came to organize effectively to protest the Vietnam War. That, of course, is a prologue to the protests today conducted by groups like Iraq Veterans Against the War and the activism of ex-soldiers like Adam Kokesh. To bring everything full circle and set us up for the next episode of Peace Revolution, this episode's conclusion features the words of Larkin Rose as he presents 5 bogus reasons for opposing freedom. Last but not least, every project I'm able to complete and present commercial-free and free to the public is a testament to those of you who listen, care, and take action to make sure that I have the resources I need to follow my inspiration to help produce meals for the mind, meals which help individuals get more out of life and enables them to get out of the realm of being controlled by ideas they don't understand. Currently in the Tragedy and Hope community, we're running a fundraiser to support the ongoing projects and the upcoming filmed interviews we've got planned. There's a list of thank yous and perks and gifts available to those of you who are financially stable enough to donate to this worthwhile endeavor. This fundraiser runs until July 22nd, which happens to be the anniversary of my first episode of 9/11 Synchronicity, that podcast I did way back in 2006. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you who has contributed thus far. That's how I financed the past month's film production schedule, which will pay off over the next 2 months. If you're a regular listener and you're not yet supporting the creation of future projects, consider the content in this episode, and if you're so moved, feel free and invited to subscribe, donate, or share Tragedy and Hope Productions with others who seek to know more, so that we can all live in a world which respects freedom, enforces justice, and empowers individuals with the liberty to live as they will, without coercion. This podcast is a curriculum for individuals to learn how to breathe freedom into their lives, 1 minute at a time, so that the ideals of living as equals do not lose consciousness and expire from lack of respiration. This is episode 89, The Art of Freedom. Keep calm and start thinking. Thank you for your support, and thank you most of all for tuning in and not dropping out.
Welcome, everybody, to what is, as I'm recording it here, an episode of School Sucks Podcast, but this is probably going to wind up in multiple places, multiple podcast feeds. And I introduce it to my audience as how to live and promote the message of liberty without having to eat the government cheese, for lack of a better expression. I'm joined today by Richard Grove of TragedyandHope.com. Hey, Rich.
Hey, Brett.
And Ernest Hancock from Declare Your Independence and Freedom's Phoenix. Hey, Ernie.
That's my pleasure. Good company, man. We're going to get some work done, I think.
So, because this is going to wind up in multiple places, like I said before, I thought we should each take 90 seconds to 2 minutes to just introduce our work. And, Ernie, you can lead off with that.
Freedom's Phoenix was a result as us being young activists back in the 90s. We could see what the internet was going to do, and we had the whole idea and concept of Freedom's Phoenix, and it was a tool for people to use to be able to take information and share it with people in a format that had a lot of different ways of doing it. We have a funding center and a marketplace and a magazine and a newspaper and the radio show, and then the ability for people to be able to do their own content and have their own special edition. I mean, it was just a tool. And what happened while we were setting that up, the Lovolution came out, and we were very involved in that. And we could see what was happening. It was Generation Next. And that's where I want to start. That's why, Brett's efforts and Richard are both right in line with what we were trying to do, is to have content available and just be a liberty nexus. Well, we're going into the next stage, and that's what I'm hoping we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And Richard Grove, the man responsible for the first podcast I ever listened to. Today you run TragedyandHope.com. Can you just tell the folks a little bit about that?
Well, Brett, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I have been a long-time aficionado of your podcast, for those who might not know that, who might be listening right now, maybe from Ernie's audience. So we all do have a shared past together of appreciating each other's individual voluntary works of art, and we've all contributed our voice in a variety of ways, but the topic that we cover consistently is freedom of the individual. Freedom from what? Freedom from slavery, of somebody else claiming ownership over your body. I happen to be almost 30 years old when I was wandering successfully, albeit successfully, through a corporate world, when I bumped up against a wall of reality. And I discovered that what I had been schooled into believing were a bunch of illusions, and that those illusions don't have any effect on that reality. You have to deal with it. I was searching for a map that listed the credible pitfalls into which I kept bumping into. And the authors that started to provide a literary version, a description of that terrain, were Anthony Sutton and Carol Quigley. Now, Anthony Sutton's books all have really long titles, but Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope seemed like, this interesting union of opposites. And I see that as the origin of creation. So it's in looking at the two opposing sides that you consider anything to make a decision in the first place. And then after I chose Tragedy and Hope, I bumped into the book back in 2004, created the website in 2009, and the audio version of that curriculum is the Peace Revolution, which, of course, comes from the famous JFK quote. If they won't let us do the right thing peacefully, then we'll do the other things not so peacefully. So we want to stay on the peaceful side of that revolution and not take up arms unless it's in self-defense. So that's the theme of our work. Non-aggression, physical self-defense, and intellectual self-defense equals freedom.
And by the way, for Peace Revolution podcast, one of the most brilliant logos I've ever seen, which is
the Vesica Pisces, which is ancient fertility symbolism of the birth of, it's birth of creativity. And again, you get that from looking at the contrast between the light and the dark, the fact and the fiction, however you want to see it. We live in the objective world. It's a dualistic world. We can talk about the subjective world any other time, but the content of this conversation has to do with objective reality. And I saw that as a fitting symbol, because we don't want to be in a state of revolution, but also the state of peace that they're recommending is that under force and aggression and a monopoly on violence. So we want to find that freedom that's in the middle, that comes from looking at both of those sides and then making our own decisions in life as individuals.
My project is School Sucks. It is a podcast primarily. We also have a YouTube channel, and we've had an expanding web community and conversation over the course of the last year that I found to be really beneficial. I started the show in 2009. For me, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into our discussion, it was very
much longer than 90 seconds. I was surprised Ernie could keep it to 90 seconds.
No,
you, of all people, going over. Very good. Talk about it.
Shocked. I do.
Wait, who went over?
No, I didn't. I don't think
I did.
Yeah, we're keeping it tight. There's three people here who like to talk and have a lot to say, and we've got a lot to do. So everybody's doing a great job so far. Where was I? Yeah. So I started the show in 2009 very much as an outlet. I felt like I had a lot of anger to express at the time. It took me a while to find a voice and find a mission. I think I was really enthusiastic about getting a project like that started. I had originally conceived it as a documentary film, like a mainstream documentary film that you see in theaters and that wins Academy Awards. But it didn't become that yet anyway. So it really is very much a show about personal growth, about critical thinking, about undoing the destructive messages of government schooling. It also is hopefully, for most people who consume it, an example of what real education is. Not schooling, but, self-directed, intrinsically motivated. And we try to build that message into every show that I put out the best I can. So that School Sucks. And we were going to build our conversation today around three questions. And I'm going to preview all three first, and then we'll go back to the first one, and I will turn it over to Ernie. The first question, why is freedom important to each of us? The second, why do we produce freedom-related content and put it out for free? And finally, what do we need to do to get more people who listen to us passively to support what we're doing actively? So, Ernie, that first question, since you are the veteran here, why is freedom important to you?
it provides the maximization of potential. I mean, there's always they don't have to tell you no if they get you to already say no to yourself, or you question, or what permit you're going to need, or somebody you got to ask permission for something. You can make your life better. You can improve your circumstance. You can learn something. You can share. You can build. You can do. But all of this stuff is they use PSYOP, where somebody got arrested or somebody was shot and killed, or died. I mean, there's always some punishment for someone that does something without a permission slip. And that's kind of the mindset that they put you in, where it used to be Yankee ingenuity. And I was born in 61, so I still remember, it was lemonade stands without a SWAT team. And I'm going, this is that mindset of the answer is always yes. The answer, I would like yes. I would like that. That's a good idea. You should do that. Do what? I don't know, whatever you just said. That attitude has been eroded from American culture, and it was intentional. It's like want everybody to know why they need us, this government thing. And so freedom to me is yes. As long as it doesn't violate another person's yes, I mean, it's always yes. And the innovation and the productivity and the increase in lifestyle and your longevity of even your life. I mean, of the quality of living with your children and that you have weekends off. I got to tell this one story and you'll understand the freedom thing. When I was, it was in the 80s and we just gotten married. Me and my friends were, starting to have families and all that kind of stuff. And we're finding out about this income tax thing, and we're doing our own businesses, and we got to pay both sides of Social Security. We're going, what the hell? Who are we working for here? And one of my best friends, he said, the accountant I went to, he, our young age, mid-20s and so on, he goes, I'll tell you when it changes. It's when you can't take your boat to the lake. And I'm going, what the heck? Well, you have the highest per capita boat ownership here in Arizona, more than Florida. I mean, it's hot, man, So you got a lot of rivers and lakes and so on. Well, what he was saying, the way he explained it, is when people, they work all week, they bust their butt, they're 8, 10, 12, 16-hour days or whatever. Then they got the weekend and they want to take their boat to the lake, and that's their decompression. That's their reward. When they can't financially buy the gas, when they can't go, they don't have time, they're working on the weekends and they're too tired. Their diet and their food and their water and their air, something to the point where when they can't either physically, financially or whatever, get the recreation on the weekends that they, reward for them being a tax slave, then you'll start to see change. And I remember that becoming, certainly when the 08 election, the 08 financial crisis and so on, during that election cycle, I started to see that. Everybody had their boats up for sale. You could buy something for nothing out here. And I'm going, yeah, I think it's time. And that was 20 years after I was exposed to that concept.
How do you feel about that now? Are you still feeling a lot of hope that there's possibility for this, and maybe not our lifetimes, but maybe, your children's lifetimes, for achieving a freer world in a political sense?
Yeah, but it's in between our ears. The revolution is us. It's not. Yeah. Everybody keeps wanting to change, government or them or somebody, and, we need you to listen to us. I don't care. Let them, whenever we do, I had like dozen lawsuits. I've gone all the way, oral argument before the Ninth Circuit. I had done 3 lawsuits, Arizona Supreme Court. I've done appeals court, Superior, blah, 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 blah. And never did I give a crap what the black robe said. They're going, well, you're never going to get a decision. I go, you're confusing me with someone that cares. I just want them to say it. Say it so we can get to the next level. I just want everybody to know that what they're doing here is grossly unconstitutional by any measure. They're being bad guys. They're doing bad things, and it's bad people. And can we go on to the next level? And so Donna and I, my wife, when our children were small, they're 25 to 29 now. And we anticipated that by the time they were our age, when we decided to do this in the late 80s, that, it was going to be, that was the race to see if we can get people at least aware of what's going on by then. Well, that was 2016 election cycle. It's like now. So we had already had this kind of plan, and we were kind of, we thought the bad guys were, as 1984 were behind schedule kind of thing, until 9/11 hit. When 9/11 hit, I'm going, yep, here we go. They're catching up, you know. So I saw a lot more optimism that Generation Next demonstrated just how much influence that they had. And I got a national talk show host sent me an email last weekend criticizing me for having too much technology on Freedom's Phoenix as opposed to more political and economic stuff. And they go, well, you abandoned the liberty movement? He's like taking a swipe at me. And I go, man, you guys don't get it. I go, this technology, individuals being able to free themselves, that is a liberty movement. They're not waiting. They don't want to go storm the ramparts and fix it. You know, there's no fixing it. There's, you know, creating something else, you know. So it's I'm much more optimistic than a lot of people are, but we're kind of focusing on the people that are making it. Is there a role, a financial role for a big enough audience to support the kind of things that we're doing that bring this stuff out? I don't know. I'm sure we'll get to that.
Well said. Rich, what would you like to add on that question? Why is freedom important?
Well, I think that we're all sharing something that we refer to in words as the human experience. And as part of that human experience, we lack the fur and fangs and protective and, you know, other types of skills and tools that animals have available innately to them. So as human beings, we have to use tools that we create ourselves. We have to have those tools as property to be able to, you know, maintain our lifestyle. If you're living, for instance, you know, in a rural situation, your ability to defend yourself, to till the land, to catch game, this sort of thing, has to do with the tools available and the fact that those are your tools and you paid for them and they are your property and you need them for survival. And the next point that I'd make from that, logically, is that if you don't have those property rights, you are the property. And so if you look at how our society is kind of shaped in this form, we can start with schooling, where school removes the natural inclination of the individual to learn, to say, you're going to go and learn whatever we arbitrarily have mandated through this committee, et cetera, et cetera. It takes the individual away from their family. And so I would observe in my adult state, you know, in my early 40s now, that slavery takes many forms. Literacy can be a form of slavery if critical thinking is not possessed and practiced consistently by the individual. If you don't have that process running, that app, if you will, running, questioning every piece of information that comes in, then you're likely to assume some of those things are true, and it's likely, highly likely, that most of those assumptions that you get past, that you take as truth, are not. And at some point, like I did, you'll bump up against that. Now, George Orwell has this, it's a wordy quote, but basically he said you can carry these illusions along for only, you know, a finite period of time, because when you're on a battlefield, you'll bump up against reality, and that's where those illusions will take a back seat. So I came up, you know, a lot of people haven't come up against that yet. They might have heard about it in some adjacent way, but they don't really care about it because it doesn't affect them. Well, my point is you don't want to wait till it adversely affects you or your family in order to have that experience. That's why I create media. I guess maybe I'm going to the next question. But the freedom aspect of it is that this is what brings happiness in life. There is a connection between freedom and truth and happiness. And some people say that ignorance is bliss. Well, if you look at it rationally and in objective reality, ignorance in many cases can constitute evil. And if you're not familiar with that concept, look up the Stanford Prison Experiment or the Milgram Experiment. But the ignorance that people are possessing out there and acting on, taking away other people's rights based on those assumptions, that's a form of slavery. And so when you get back to it, if we have a model that is manufacturing consent and instilling slavery upon individuals and attacking people at their youngest and oldest ages particularly, they're attacking the weakest among us. It not only tells us a lot about our enemy, but it tells us if we occupy the objective, rational, here's the factual high ground, that the opposition can't touch it. They're not willing to, because their position depends on deception and lies. So my strategy in creating media and in all the themes of freedom that I can find is that you don't battle the existing model, you take actions to make it obsolete. And I think that's why we're all here.
That segues nicely, I think, into what my answer would be. Battling the existing model. I think that's a temptation that a lot of us have. I certainly had when I was introduced to the philosophy of liberty, and I've said this an endless number of times on the show in the past, but I journeyed to, you know, the furthest place away from myself when I was new. So, I mean, in Ernie's case, when Ernie helped, build momentum behind this Lovolution, gosh, he probably already had, 15 years of experience living this at the time. For me, that was the beginning. That was right when I started to understand what the philosophy of liberty was, non-aggression, property rights, the concept of self-ownership. But, suddenly I found myself a great many clicks away from myself, and really devoting a lot of time and thought to things that were going to be very, very difficult to change. I even started the show. I felt like when I go back and listen to the things that I was doing in the early days of School Sucks, it was entertaining, but I was certainly coming across as kind of a know-it-all, considering how many things I was still trying to figure out personally. And I acknowledged that about a year into the show. And I really started to reorient myself around this idea that as hard as it is to accept sometimes, even, I'm here in New Hampshire, part of the Free State Project, their slogan is liberty in our lifetime. The only really valuable liberation work that many of us will get to do, especially many of us who are, over 30, is probably going to be on ourselves. And I think that building stronger, freer selves then leads us to build better relationships, which can lead to better communities, which eventually can do what you say, Rich, make the existing system obsolete, because stronger people are far less likely to depend on the state, on its schools, on its handouts, and they're going to be less susceptible to these, I'm not saying this for shock value, it's a very real thing, they're psychological warfare campaigns. So my show is very much about my journey to freedom, and I think that it's great that everybody comes at this from a slightly different angle. I've spent time at both of your houses, Rich and Ernie, and, I know, Rich, last year you were putting a lot of time and research and work into putting together more survivalist resources, like how to live independently, how to be efficacious, even in difficult situations where that can be kind of a trick sometimes. We can all know how to do things when we're not in a panic, but, knowing how to do things to survive and to thrive in difficult situations is really valuable. Ernie has definitely been leading by example in this respect too. I remember I was at his house a little earlier than this time last year. He had pretty much an entire building on his compound there. Ernie, is it okay to call it a compound, or does that make you nervous? Should I not call it a compound?
2 acres with a barn and stored. I got space.
Yeah. So there was he took me into this building that was it seemed entirely devoted to making batteries. So self-sufficiency in all respects is a huge part of freedom. But what my message is that it starts on a personal level, and I'm trying to be really, the best example I can of someone who's motivated and curious and excited about beneficial changes in my life that will lead to a freer existence personally, and then scale it up from there.
I want to make one comment, talking about the big brain boxes here. I had to look up efficacious, sure. Which is, producing a desired result. Thank you. I just want, your audience probably knows what that means, and now mine does.
I feel like I say it every show.
There's all these big words. It's like talking to Richard and you, man. I always learn something. Your journey, I went through this, like you say, for, a lot of years, it was 15 years probably prior to that. And I knew better than to tell people, you're still voting. I mean, of course, that was my 06 campaign. You're still voting. And that's where the Lovolution logo came from, was from that campaign. But it was very important to me to understand that people had to go through it themselves. They had to do the Lovolution. They had to go through the politics. They had to. And as I did my show, going, look, this is what you're going to learn. This is what you're going to. What's the difference between an anarchist and a libertarian? About 2 or 3 election cycles if you're paying attention. So I think after the 16 election cycle, a lot of things that we're going to be doing at PorcFest will kind of emphasize this, is that you start to realize it's not them. It's us. And as long as we keep the focus on that, my focus, I'm a little bit different, where you guys are heavy into education, as am I, but I had 4 children, and now I got my 7th grandkid coming. So when they say freedom in my lifetime, at least in my grandkid's lifetime, so I want to leave them with a good example, a good name, a good standard, and it'll take care of itself after that. We just got to kind of negotiate this system that we're trying to, make obsolete, and how we can inspire people. So my thing is that why I promote both of you guys so much. I've done a lot of things, because I look for people just like you. And I go, look, they're doing it. They're doing it. They're doing it. You should pay attention to them doing it. And then a lot of people, they go, well, I got my own. Cool, you should do it too. So it's an inspiration thing. And we saw that during the 07, 08 years. And that was when it peaked. And then people started to get educated. And I'm wondering where we're going to go from there.
Do you have any vision of that?
No. Freedom's the answer. What's the question?
I know. It's really hard because there's so many variables. I always do this trick. It reminds me with the conversations that I've had with Jeffrey Tucker, who's just endlessly optimistic about the future. And I get kind of sucked into his optimism, but then the cynicism comes in. And I say, yeah, but then this would probably happen. I'm excited about the direction things are going. I'm excited about watching people wake up. I'm really, really energized when I receive emails from people telling me how my work might have been involved in their process. It's very hard to predict where things are going to go next. What do you think of that, Rich?
I don't think it's our job to make decisions for other people.
Right.
I don't want other people making decisions for me, and therefore I don't seek to make decisions for other people. I'm willing to share with people who are on an earlier part of the journey. Here's how I make my decisions, and I'm still improving every day. Here's the method I use. Here's the landmark evidence and artifacts that I saw along the way, and here are some of my other experiences, and that's how I arrived logically at my conclusion. And then I would listen patiently. Sometimes the other person has verifiable facts that fit in and help me understand a different perspective, and I change and I learn, and it's a discussion, meaning that I'm open to improving my position if you have some objective facts from which I'm not familiar, And so it's not about having made up my decision at any point in the journey. I think the journey that I've taken over the past 10 years is like I've made millions of decisions, and not all of them were exactly correct, but I tried to learn from those mistakes, get up, brush myself off, not whine about it too much, and keep moving forward. And so I would look at my earlier podcast, like in 9/11 Synchronicity, which was the first 3 years, was 2006 to 2009. I don't know that I'm absolutely accurate about most of the stuff in there. I was an individual exploring an unnavigated, unmapped terrain and trying to say, hey, these things exist, they're worth consideration, and think for yourself. That's the one thing that I would really hesitate to support in any way, which is people listening and just believing what they hear without thinking, because that's the thing I'm trying to get through. This stuff exists. How does it fit together? Am I putting it together the right way? Can you see a different perspective? It's about offering it up so other people can process the data very similarly to that which I encountered it. And I'm just trying to say, there are things here that should be discussed, in my opinion, that could be discussed, in speaking in a voluntary way there, that could be discussed by others that would yield a much more significant and substantial choice point and decision and judgment pattern than what we're currently doing under stimulus reaction, assuming that the media is telling us the truth.
Yeah, the something that you said reminded me of this idea that the old media is very much about communicating a lack of faith in the intellectual abilities of those who consume it, and a lack of trust in those people generally. And one of the things that I think we're both doing is the opposite of that, basically communicating that trust to people. This is a journey. This is an exploration. I'm going to make mistakes. I am not a guru. I'm just trying to be a guide through this. And, I felt, and this is going to lead into our second topic a little bit, but in the beginning, I was really apprehensive about being wrong, about communicating misinformation, as if by sitting there and talking into the microphone and then posting it onto the internet, I had to have all the answers. And it was from a series of mistakes and realizations that it was very clear to me that I certainly don't have anything close to all the answers, that it became okay to transfer that presentation into more of a community exploration, which is certainly part of what you do at Tragedy and Hope as well.
Well, I think one of the points worth mentioning is the experience of listening to a Peace Revolution episode becomes so much more unique and interesting to you
when you don't just sit there and listen, you start to look stuff up and you start to learn for yourself, because I promise you that has a momentum. And if you do it enough, it's like a juggernaut effect where now you can just consume copious amounts of data, sort out that which is substantial, keep that, dismiss that which is arbitrary, and move on. And you can from there realize these patterns that exist when you can see more than this super short attention span goldfish mentality that they want to present you with. I think media really went downhill after MTV. And I know I must sound like an old man saying this, but it was the MTV culture that took, in a feature-length Hollywood movie, yes, you would have cuts every, couple minutes, there would be that's how they built up suspense in the old days. You might have a film that has an opening scene of 12 minutes, The Touch of Evil with Charlton Heston. So what you get with the MTV culture is now they take those hundreds of cuts that are in a movie and they put it into 3 minutes. And now every few seconds they're giving you a new camera angle and something to process. And you don't have time to even process that. Here's the next image. And so that type of stimuli on people has then flowed back out to Hollywood. And today's movie culture is a very rock'em sock'em. We got to cut a whole bunch of times because we can't show you our crappy cinematography. So it's like the culture is doing it for one reason. They want to profit, and then we end up adapting to it. And now the detrimental effect on individuals is that people have attention spans so short that they can't take in the larger picture that is the actual reality. So they have to stick to these sound bites.
Oh, they don't want them to make that leap. That's the one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
George Carlin, that one skit that he does, he goes, hey, man, it isn't going to get any better. There's a club and you ain't in it, and on and on and on. And the thing that he was really emphasizing is critical thinking has been taken out. They don't want you to even imagine. And that's one thing that I realized early on in the 90s as we're going, oh, L. Neil Smith, a science fiction author, libertarian, he made the point, he goes, you used to go to the supermarket and you would have science fiction was a big giant section all by itself. And then eventually it just went away. You go to Blockbuster Video and sci-fi kind of got merged into action and horror or something. It was like it was intentional. They wanted to take imagination away. And that's one thing that I really enjoyed science fiction is it gave you an opportunity to think what can be or even should be, that there's something different. And you could see that the media, the movies done, the education, the institutions, they were all trying to get us to have this group think about something. And then, of course, whenever they came up with a number on the news, it would be, well, this export number and this economic indicator, and there's a number that we need to change, so we got to pass a law. So whenever you see a number in the media, there's an advocacy for a dial, a switch, a button to change that number to be what they want it to be. And it's just an excuse for them to create more stuff. And there's a plan. When you I've run for office a gazillion times, since 1990, I haven't in the last few election cycles, but it was that was the cheapest, easiest way for us to change what got debated, what was even discussed. Well, we don't want to talk about it. Of course you don't. That's why I'm here, So we would do this. And the one thing that I realized when you go on the forums and they have the Republican and Democrat and my plan and no, my plan's better than his plan sucks, do my plan. They go to the Libertarian and they'll go, okay, what's your plan? For you to have your own plan? Well, that's not a plan. We need somebody to lead and tell us what to do. And I'm going, wow, is it that bad? And that would be the focus of what we were doing, is to be an inspiration for people to have their own plan for their life. And that was the promise that this country was about, is that you get to have your own plan, this Yankee ingenuity, the answer is always yes. It's of course you can do that. Go do it. Waiting on you now. So that has been beaten out of us, but not just in America, worldwide. And it's like America was like the holdout. And then here came Dr. Ron Paul in where he's emphasizing this very point, is that the whole purpose of government was something different. And was that popular? Did the media embrace it? Did people? No, but the people did. So that was just beat down. And when the people realized what was happening, they're going, I see. Yeah, you're bad guys. And so I'm looking for a culture that has everybody gets to have their own plan. and we start to share those different plans, and people get to pick from those plans. Well, it's not just America. This is a generational thing. With the internet and the ability to communicate and translate, and heck, just about everybody's around the world's second language English anyway, I'm going, okay, this is something much larger than I think people realize. There is a revolution between the ears that has already happened, but it's not being embraced by the traditional institutions and the media. In fact, those institutions and the media were captured. They were taken over. All the regulatory agencies, all the promises that they made to, protect us and secure us from the evils of, well, they really were there to manage us like livestock. Once you realize that, you can start investing your time and effort and money into other thought processes, efforts and examples that, are better fit your own life. And they'll go, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to collect water or grow your own food, put a tomato plant in the front yard or have a couple of chickens. I mean, it's just, I'm going, wow, it's an effort to make us dependent. And the more self-sufficient and self-reliant that we are, the more freedom that we have. And technology is allowing that in the form of just purifying water or growing food or producing your own energy. As I think energy is the big thing. Once that starts to get to where we're working on a project now with Salt River Project as one of the power suppliers here in the Valley. And there's a gentleman that, a wealthy individual that, he has 2 electric cars, his 2,600 square foot home, and his electric bill for last year was $198. So that's, all his transportation, fuel cost, his house, everything by solar. Well, then he's going at it against SRP, the utility that is now trying to punish people that are making more energy. They're going, hey, man, we got incentives before and we encouraged it, but now, oh, hell no. So they're starting to try and charge. So we're making an effort out of that. My thing, and he's coming over tomorrow to help us select some equipment that we're going to turn a double axle boat trailer that we have into a power station. But I do this not so much out of, well, I'll benefit, that's cool. But it's more inspiration to demonstrate and show people, look, you don't have to be a hamster on their wheel. Once we are able to, I think we're well on the way to do that. And I made an emphasis today on the radio show about it's called Apollo. It's a Raspberry Pi Arduino kind of with 11 sensors on it. That's why I call it Apollo 11, And it has all these sensors that you can use to make anything, automated. And I'm going, wow, there's so many things I can think of. So what do I want to emphasize to my grandchildren? My children, I was in manufacturing. I go, man, it's all about manufacturing. Now, 3 of my 4 children work at Honeywell Aerospace, doing some amazing things. But of course, I'm going, yeah, you're part of the military industrial complex there, oh, no, we're making jet engine for you. Yeah, that's what I thought. So it's, they're doing very well. But now my grandkids, what should I emphasize? Well, you look at all these, I have a Ghost Gunner over here that's a desktop mill. I got, I haven't got my 3D printer yet. I have one, but I just didn't have time to, mess with it. It was donated. I sent it back because I just didn't have time to go over learning the CAD. So what am I going to do? My grandchildren, the oldest is 5, and we're going to sit down and we're going to learn how to code. We're going to learn how to do computer-aided drafting. We're going to learn how to make things on the 3D printer. We're going to learn how to mill things. Why? Because that's the future. If you take a 12-year-old and you put in their head, just imagination of something, I need a new whiz bang for my remote control, whatever the heck, and the ability to do it, they just do it. Desktop manufacturing is going to change a lot. So this drafting, this computer design, because I'm looking into, we just did a thing that's called Humans Need Not Apply. It was a video that was done by some people, and the point that they were making, there isn't any job, even white-collar job, click and point and do and stat and whatever the heck, the Wall Street is run by computers now. So I'm going, there is going to be like buggy whip unions is for like everybody, but do you get to own your own computer, robot to go out and work for you? I remember a short science fiction story that, was all about that. So this imagination, we can do certain things that would increase our productivity and our lifestyle. But what if that's made, you're not allowed to have that drone. You're not allowed to do that delivery. You got to get an FAA permission slip to do your own delivery of the Uber sidekick peacemaker app of I don't need you anymore. When you do this, I'm wondering, I always was interested in who opposes it. What organization, what methods are they using? And, with podcast and radio shows and websites and the kind of research that we do and the inspiration that we have, once you get Generation Next to understand that the answer is yes, and government is just, an antiquated, hurdle that should just be avoided or ignored and you turn the other way, it's like government becomes smaller and smaller in your rearview mirror and it slips over the horizon. You forget that it was ever there. This is what I'm seeing happening, and I'm not really that worried about the future, because the long-term trend is for individual freedom, printing press, internet, the accumulation of hardware that we can use and program ourselves and get a 12-year-old to go fix it for us. Because I was always asking my kids, how the VCR worked anyway. So, this is, I'm very optimistic. The problem that I see is if we lose that optimism, if we lose that yes, if we lose the Generation Next coming up and gets indoctrinated with this, you got to, I am a Bill, and that's where junior high comes in. That's why they separate it. And with your School Sucks podcast, I'm just going, yeah, that's why I was emphasizing your work a lot of times, is because the families, it's not just the kids, it's the parents. They don't know any different. If you can just show that there's a difference, there's an opportunity for them to be, I don't know if wealthy is the goal, but, self-sustaining and comfortable, and that we get to get back our rest. What government has done is you work more hours for less. Everything costs more. Inflation hits. You have more taxation on everything that you accumulate. Oh my goodness, you were successful, and then you got to give it more to us and tax the rich. And the rich, that line keeps getting lower and lower and lower. Hey, you have a microwave and a toilet. Well, you should be taxed more. So I can see what's happening, and I see the progression of there being a solution. And the solution is just the imagination of young people with a little bit of critical thinking and access to information that they can go online, learn something in 3 months of a summer time for a 12-year-old, and I'm the new whiz-bang, I know everything kind of at 13 coming out, and I saved the planet. And this is happening a lot. So I emphasize that because I see that's where the solution is. It doesn't serve the institutional powers in charge now to be able to empower individuals. You don't see that. It's always about, you need our subscription, you need our access, you need our monthly fee of, where's our cut? But what I'm looking at is a worldwide change. So I don't think we've seen we just got the beginning of this is starting. It's just what role all the three of us are going to play as this develops to where humanity frees itself, because it's not going to happen any other way.
Right. Yeah. And, I think we're all allowed to ask this question: how will the world change for the better? But the answers are never really like individual action driven by desire and critical thinking scaled up. We're always trained from a very young age to think about the world changing in a political context, where unfortunately we also learn we're all powerless. Pick up your government school history book. Who outside of the political structure ever had a significant impact on the world? Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, you can count them on one hand. And I think you can already see it for 2016. It's not like the people in power didn't learn the lessons from 2008 and 2012 with somebody like Ron Paul. They're way ahead of the game pushing this product called Hillary Clinton, who is going to beat this other product called Jeb Bush. Getting people out of that context is essential, and that's why the propagation of media like this is so important. It's creating a support system to get people comfortable with what they think already. Like, yeah, hey, those thoughts you have, here we are saying them, and there needs to just be more and more of that, because I really see, from this time in 2016 to 2012 to 2008, the gears against freedom are just turning harder and faster, and that's really scary. So, yeah, Ernie, I think that that was great what you shared. I want to give Rich a chance to respond to it as well. That's really valuable insight, pulling people out of the political context, even though maybe it has to start there like it did for so many of us. Like, yeah, hey, here's the next thing, this guy, Ron Paul, this next election, but inserting those ideas and then hopefully inspiring some dormant curiosity in people to say, well, come outside of that. There's more. Rich, what would you like to say in response to what Ernie said?
Well, I can relate. I mean, there was a time in 2000 I think I voted for Bush. And then the 2004 election, I had educated myself to vote for an independent libertarian candidate named Michael Badnarik. And I was really proud of myself for coming so far and learning so much. And then that was the last time I ever voted, because I was like, whoa, what am I doing by advocating this system? Speaking of that fine system, if you get the Google near you and you're listening to my words right now, Martin Luther King was found by a trial of his peers in a legal court, was killed by the United States government. So if that is a surprise to you, that's a good starting point into looking at everything that we're going to talk about over the next several minutes. There was this point brought up about self-responsibility, and the absence of that self-responsibility provides zero resistance against these people who want to, reap havoc and perpetrate tyranny over ourselves, our friends, and our families. So if the imagination has to be threatened for self-responsibility and self-reliance and self-esteem and self-confidence to all go out the window, that's proven through the history of public schooling, which was one of the reasons behind my interview with John Taylor Gatto back in 2012, The Ultimate History Lesson, because, if I can boil the 5-hour conversation down to a soundbite, if you're not writing your own script in life, somebody else already has a script written for you, and you're just acting that out unwittingly, which is kind of like the absence of consciousness. So that's not a good thing. I wanted to pick up on that point that you made about being self-reliant and part of the self-responsibility of knowing where your food comes from and having a role in that process. I think Ernie's house is a great demonstration of what can be done on it's like 2 acres in suburban Phoenix, so it's in a desert, and he's got a variety, whether it's the aquaponics with the fish feeding into the biodomes with all these plants growing, or he's got chickens, so he has eggs, he's got orange trees, grapefruit trees, all these type of trees that bear fruit. It's not a whole lot of extra work, and it's a good example. He's further ahead in his plan of self-reliance and self-sufficiency than I am, so I'm learning from his actions right now. But I think it's common to people to want to try to take control of their food supply and the quality of it, because food is something that's used to control people. And Ernie's out there being one of many people, but he's very vocal about it, showing what can be done.
And that's really what we're doing. It's inspiring. It's like my grandkids go out and they pick the potatoes. They go out and they eat cherry tomatoes off the vine. They know where food comes from. They go and collect the eggs. They help feed the fish and do it. All of this, and then of course we learned how to build geodesic domes. We thought that was a cheap way for shelter and doing these kind of different things. So there's a lot of stuff that we did just to inspire other. Even when I do the battery project, I got a lab coat and a Doc Brown kind of Rod Stewart wig kind of deal. And I get all dressed up and have some homeschool kids come over, and I'm just like, what shall we do? And as you go through on the whiteboard and you give them some chemistry, how educated am I on that? Well, I mean, probably more than some, but that wasn't the point. The point was to inspire them and to inspire others with our videos and so on. And we really need to make more emphasis on a lot of this stuff. But there's so much content out there of people doing this. Once I start something and I see other people doing it as well or better, well, then I go on to something else. I don't need to do it anymore. I can emphasize what they're doing. This is inspiration, and showing them what can be done is so much more powerful than, I don't know, just trying to pass a law. Everybody's so focused on, a law, and the election processes that we went through is just an education on just how powerful people can be. But I think I'd ask you guys, do you think the 2016 election cycle is going, because I've been getting a lot of contacts from the Rand Paul campaign. I mean, they're just probably 3 conversations. They're really, well, come on, Ernie, how come you're not in and you need to once more into the breach thing? And I'm going, no, because if he wasn't going to be playing, yeah, but he's in his heart, he's an anarchist, you know, and I'm going, well, I don't care. I want to know what he's saying on the podium. So when somebody will send me, like he did a CBS morning program just yesterday or day before, and he's up there and he does a fine job of, you know, kind of, but it's always a better plan. Yes, I would arm the Kurds. Yes, we need to include the Sunnis in the yada yada. What the hell are we even doing in the Middle East? If you're not saying that, then what do I care? Well, it's so you can get elected. To go, I'm not playing politics. I'm just not, because that's not going down the road that we've shown is available for Generation Next. It makes us hypocritical in a lot of the things that we emphasize. So I'm looking for, from your guys' perspective, is the 2016 election cycle going to play large in the freedom movement, other than the freedom movement making fun of it? I mean, I don't know. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, first of all, Ernie, I just want to get you on the record here to make sure we're clear. In a lot of what you said, are you suggesting that tapping into kids' curiosity and their desire to be more independent with these kinds of projects is going to have a more beneficial outcome for the future of society than microwave taxes and toilet taxes? Is that your position?
Yeah, what you said.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure. That's what I thought I was hearing, so I think we're on the same page about that. You know, this is my answer is real short, and then I'll throw it to Rich. This was my concern about seeing the gears of this mainstream media machine and political machine turning faster and harder than I can remember them turning in the past. Now, maybe I'm just older and I have a better idea of what to look for in 2016 than I did in 2008, where part of me was saying, like, who let this Ron Paul guy on the stage? But wow, this is really interesting and exciting what he's saying into the television. I haven't seen the same momentum building yet as far as the freedom movement's intervention in the business as usual activities of the 2016 election. I mean, there's still plenty of time for that to change, and I hope some exciting things happen, but I'm not as enthusiastic about using 2016 as a teaching tool as I would have been in the past elections.
Well, you never know, Brett. There
Sure.
might be some interesting campaign that people don't see coming. There could be some other type of campaign that's vote for nobody, right? I happened to see a Rand Paul filibuster the other day, and I got all the caveats to Rand Paul, and yet there was somebody speaking about freedom and liberty and why mass surveillance is wrong for a long time. And he had some tag team partners. It was interesting. So I see these perks of hope, not necessarily in Rand Paul himself, but the fact that in the minds of everyone listening to that filibuster, they independently were thinking, yeah, you know, he's got a point there. And it's not about the messenger. It's about the message of freedom. I'm just saying that he happened to give it a voice for those couple hours in that one particular time. And I got some questions about his chief of staff and some of his political support positions and all this other stuff. But I can set that all aside and appreciate a pretty good filibuster when I have the opportunity to see it, because they don't happen too often. And I think that just inspires people to realize that freedom, if you want to have freedom, it's not a given. We're not born with freedom. Freedom is learned. We have to learn freedom again because they've schooled it out of our minds. And that's what, the peace revolution is about. The peace revolution occurs between your ears. That's the battleground that they've already occupied. And I'm trying to help people take back their own mind so they can think for themselves. Because I think that freedom has requirements that can be shown logically. So I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm just saying if you're an individual and you live a voluntary lifestyle and you'd like to see more freedom, then we have to let other people know what the recipe or the requirements for freedom actually is. It would look something like, in its raw form, non-aggression, physical self-defense, and intellectual self-defense. It would have to do with knowledge of self and knowledge of your environment. Those are the two areas that they like to hide information. That's how they control people. So by studying how they control us, we can then liberate ourselves from that ignorance.
Yeah. In the election process, I've seen this happen because, I got some gray in the beard. But when you go and you'll have these forums with other candidates, 2 years later, you're back again, run for Congress. 4 years later for whatever statewide office. You come in, and everything that you were saying before during the forum, they saw the impact it had on the audience. They saw that they want that kind of applause. So they start mimicking it. They start saying it. They don't mean it, but at least they're saying it. And then they put little caveats on it. Yeah, but what would happen if? Oh, well, mushroom clouds. Well, heck, we just enslave everybody then. So it's just, all of this, as I've seen the progression of the people have demonstrated the popularity of freedom. It is a politician's job to get the most votes and get some support and everything. And they come out there and they'll say this, but they know that the people know that they don't mean it. Well, then with Dr. Paul, you start having 13-year-olds go back and look and say, hey, man, this guy's been saying the same thing for decades. I saw it happen, and I predicted it with my friends and people that, are of means, that are involved in politics and heavy. I go, you're going to see something that you didn't anticipate, that you couldn't possibly imagine. Because where did this 70-something-year-old congressman from somebody nobody heard of, what the heck, and they thought they were going to embarrass him off the stage. Well, you're just a libertarian, yeah, and you're all just communists. So, what's the difference? I vote me over you. So that concept of relying on people acting what they perceive to be their own self-interest is they have to say the right things that are inspiring to the young, because they were always screaming, where are the young people? We need more Indians to 15 gazillion chiefs to tell them what to do. Well, when they started doing what they wanted, expressing themselves and advocating for freedom, then they're going, yeah, but we don't want you to do that, not that way. You need to get a permit and permission from us, and you have to come in and do what we want you to do. Well, I'm seeing this. They're just abandoning the political process, not because, of anything other than it's a waste of time. And so I'm advocating for this. You're still voting because it forces them to have to address it. They have to, take that big giant block of support, and they try and bring it in. So they say the right things, but then they kind of, politic it a little bit when they're on national television. So while Rand may be saying a lot of good stuff, from the filibuster, when he gets on the TV and they start pressing him on certain points, then it's politics. I go, no, next. And they have to have this standard in order for them to even continue it, because if they get reward and benefit from, watering it down, to make the media talking heads happy, well, it will just keep going down that way. So there has to be some culture out here going, oh, hell no, I call BS on the whole thing. Well, they have to be legitimate. And that was why I really liked Authoritarian Sociopathy, the paper that was done by Davi Barker. And he mentioned the Milgram experiment in Stanford and all this stuff. He's going, you skip to the end of that article, and the point that he was making, he goes, the only time that people in authority, that people that have the shiny badges, the only time they even remotely act like what they're supposed to is when they themselves see that their position is illegitimate. That is the only time. Whenever you give them legitimacy, well, they don't need to act, in individual self-interest or freedom, or they don't care. They're going to do whatever they're going to do because they got the shiny badge. It's only when the culture says all y'all are illegitimate, then they'll start trying to justify their existence by, acting better. So my whole goal has been to make, no, you're all illegitimate. This whole process is illegitimate. Then will they act better? Probably. But that's not my focus. My focus is the people know they're illegitimate. Then what? I don't know. But you have to have a standard. Non-aggression principle is probably a good one. So that's kind of why I do the things the way I do. And the inspiration to be able to extricate yourself from the grid or the system, that just gives you more confidence. We had a foreign student from Finland came, and she got the Finnish government to give her a chunk of money to go do a documentary or a paper on America's fascination with prepping. So they watched Doomsday Prepper and all that. And then I found out from her that all over the world, the television that comes out of America and National Geographic, and they try and make, and I know the people that have been on there and talked to them and interviewed, they make stuff up. They make you look stupid and silly, and where's your tinfoil hat? And they do that intentionally. So the entire world, all them preppers in America are just crazy. When she came over here and started to interview people in California and Idaho and Utah and Arizona, she came on our show and we talked a lot and spent some days with her and had her go to different farms and so on out here in the desert where you can do with water. And she said, the one common one factor that I found that all these people, they were wide-ranging philosophical hippie commune to patriot tea party and kind of the world's coming to an end. They all had the same thing to say. The only common denominator was they felt that they didn't have a voice, they didn't have a vote, they didn't have any say, and when they started taking care of themselves, they felt that they had a say. They felt like they were empowering themselves. That is what I think the biggest inspiration we have for people is that they feel empowered. And that's where School Sucks comes in, and Tragedy and Hope, to where, you know, you learn stuff, especially with the school and where children, they're taking care. I guarantee, Brett, you're getting all kinds of communications over the years from people that thank you for saving the future of their children. I mean,
yes,
how important, you know, is that?
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic, especially for somebody who talked to, over the early years of my professional career, hundreds of people and didn't feel like I was having any kind of impact. I was carrying around, you know, names that I could count on one or two hands of people who had been impacted by what I was doing, what I was teaching over a course of 5, 7, 8 years. And then suddenly I could put out something and the next day have feedback in the same numbers. What I had to accumulate over almost most of a decade from being out there in the classroom or driving from house to house to tutor. So yeah, that has been a huge motivator. That's it's been really inspiring. It's certainly kept me going, even as we're probably going to talk about today. Sometimes this work can be frustrating, but I try to remember those experiences when I feel that way.
You know, I want to ask Richard, you know, in that same vein, the communications that you get with the information that you have. I mean, damn, it's overwhelming, you know, what you've done with the connections with the brain software, and, you know, this guy's connected to that guy, and look at this and the history of, and so on. It's just fascinating. And I'm wondering how that practically manifests in the communications to you about how it's changed their life. Could you give me some examples of that?
Well, first off, just from, you know, the ultimate history lesson with John Taylor Gatto, we get letters probably every week of people who have pulled their kids out of school, and this was a couple years ago, and they're having a great homeschool experience. So it's about, you know, people who hear about it for the first time, then start to think for themselves, then try to assess whether or not that's something that's feasible to integrate at that time, or plan to do it later if they'd like to do it. And so we're always bumping into people via their communications with us along the journey, and they just started, or they just, you know, are doing it now, or they're planning to do it. And so people are at various stages of, some people are just having trouble processing all the words that we're using in this because it's already stretching their attention span. And so what I tried to do to, you know, which ends up in having that effect, what I tried to do at the beginning is find the folks who know how to tell fact from fiction and who care about freedom. And then among that, you know, it's not a large group, but it's a pretty sizable group in this country. Find the people with the longest attention spans. I made that my audience because there's a lot of information that has been withheld from us, and I need people who are diligent and careful in their learning and take notes, because, you know, I'm encountering this for the first time in my life, and so I'm just trying to leave a trail of breadcrumbs of the credible evidence and artifacts that I come across that reflect that there's a plan ongoing to take away the sovereignty not only of the states themselves in this country, but of all individuals in it, and to have our rights mandated by some central, you know, technocratic authority of which you have no local accountability. You have no private property. So I see, in essence, a plan to enslave humanity probably forever with the level of technology and that gap between what we have and what they're using against other human beings on this planet that were funded with our tax dollars, because most people never think about all that. So I just see this, life's an ongoing situation, and what's going on right now is in flux, and it's very much changing. But what isn't changing is that the history of human beings is of people using a variety of methods to try to control other human beings and try to suppress truth and knowledge that would help other individuals remain free. So noticing that pattern, I was like, well, can I just sit here and whine about it, or is there something I can actually do, you know, to add to the conversation? And what I try to do is consistently ask, what can I do to provide my audience with more value and more empowering productions given my limited time and resources? And so, you know, that forces you to be creative. And, you know, when I mentioned this idea of I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this research and I'm going to share it with people for free, you know, when I had that idea in 2004, I had a friend who said, well, you'll never make it because you don't have a revenue plan and you don't have all this stuff. I just trusted this needs to be done. at some point, people will appreciate what I'm doing, and they'll want to see me do it, longer and stronger and more prolific and a little bit easier and a little bit less stress of the consistent unknown. So I would say you can make art with a practical application of freeing the individual, or more accurately, allowing individuals to know that freedom's available and that you hold the key. So if you can do that, that's art with a practical application. To me, that's a good and worthy use of my time, attention, and consciousness here on this planet.
Absolutely. We set out to cover 3 topics today, just as a checkpoint here. I think we've dealt with the first 2 pretty thoroughly. The importance of freedom and why each one of us produces freedom-related content. Do we want to say anything else about why it is free? I think we are asking people to already invest time, and attention in what we're doing to spread this message. That is a pretty big ask, but then if people are getting value, if people are seeing that it changes their lives in significant ways, then we hope they will get on board with contributing.
I look at it as the metaphorical structures which hold our freedom. Now, this is the use of a cognitive illusion. I'm just trying to build out an idea. That structure that holds our freedom for all our friends and family for the next however many generations, that's on fire. We happen to have lakes and tanks, and we put the water in the tank and we bring it to the fire. And if after the fire's out, if somebody can say, hey, we really appreciate, and here's covering your gas cost or whatever it costs to do that, none of us are in this for profit, because there's a number of other ways that we could go about living our lives and be severely more profitable than anything that we could ever touch with doing this. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. There's structures, metaphorical and literal, that have taken tens of thousands of years of human history to build and to refine into what we were all born into in this country, okay? And so if you've traveled to other countries in the world, they might have some cool stuff over there, and this and that was really nice, but when you come back here, you have a lot of rights that other people on this planet lost, or maybe never even had in written history. So I appreciate the gift that I was given by being born in this country, and I hate, if there's something I hate, it's the use of all that hard work, blood, sweat, and tears put in by all of our ancestors into this country being raped and pillaged right now, and in a variety of ways. Civil rights is just the least of it. The mass spying, the use of military on our own population, people disappearing into camps. It's very Gulag Archipelago. If you want to check that out, that's it's not that long ago, and there's many signs that's going on here. So from my perspective, we are guarding something that is very precious, that is under attack, and we could really use a couple more hands, helping us out, because our actions are in self-defense. They are not aggressive in any way. We're simply pointing out the tools which exist that individuals can leverage in their own lives of their own volition to free themselves from this full spectrum dominance over individuals.
And a huge part of this has to do with this need that I think each one of us has. I certainly can speak for myself here, to live purposefully. And this wasn't like, waking up or always having some kind of vision. It was a decade spent thinking I was doing the world's most valuable work, helping children. And I think that was why I got into it as a young, idealistic, big government left-winger, that this is how you help. You go and you find out what the state wants you to do, and then you do that. I just felt directionless and purposeless, and like I was having no effect. And it was through a series of failures and hard lessons. And, I think our stories relate in this respect, Rich, these powerful wake-up calls that come, some obviously more powerful than others, that you don't awake one day with this vision of what you're supposed to do. For me anyway, in my case, it was kind of failing my way into it and then learning from each failure and still failing and still learning. And that has taken me up to where I am right now. But it is very important for me, just as it always was, to feel purposeful about life. And for thousands of years, people were given purposes. Yeah, you please the king, you try to get into heaven. We'll tell you every step along the way. Obviously, those are not as powerful motivators anymore for most people. People find purpose in their work, Even though they might hate their jobs, they find purpose in causes, even though causes can certainly be ephemeral. But this is what it is for me. And, I'd never see anything that I'm doing as any kind of a sacrifice, not that anybody's suggesting that. This is a really important part of leading a fulfilled life for me. And that's a big reason why I produce this stuff. And, I started putting it out for free because I wanted people to hear it. I think I had this fantasy about you'll be discovered on the internet, maybe. You just put this out and they'll say, hey, that guy has great ideas. I want to give him $1 million to make a movie. That was maybe, something in the back of my head. But I knew I was better off personally by making this information available to more people. And I was absolutely right about that. I did not become a millionaire, but I made some of the most valuable connections that I ever could have wanted. I've learned so much from a lot of great people, and I've felt very fulfilled and purposeful in what I do because I started doing that almost 6 years ago.
Ephemeral, a new word. Lasting for a very short time. I'm going to learn a lot today.
What, 2 words? Is that what it is?
I got 2 words out of this, man. I'm a smart guy now.
Nice.
This is we're looking for a longer lasting effect. I think it's already happened. And I'm really looking forward to what comes next. And a lot of people, myself and Freedom's Phoenix and everything for, some things that kind of hit nationally. But there are so many things that we've accomplished years before and since the Levolution that you may not even know that we were involved in it. But that was never the point. The point was to keep adding to this. And the one thing, I think it came from Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn, Richard would know. It was the concept of we're just looking for someone to turn ourselves into. We don't know to who or for whom for what. It's just that we need to get a permission slip, or I feel guilty already, or you're looking over your shoulder and you're asking permission. That concept, that mindset is what was created. And if we can change that, well, then you change everything. And that comes from, that's why I think that they created junior high and this schooling. I mean, what a word, schooling.
Oh. And teenager, the term. Go ahead.
Well, tell me about the teenager term. What does that mean? I got to look it up.
Well, I would just say really quickly that the whole concept of, by the way, middle school, the darkest period in my life, lasting 2 years. I mean, the darkest extended period, 2 whole years. I mean, talk about meaninglessness and purposelessness. But the concept of adolescence was very much an invention of psychologists in the early 20th century. And, this idea that somebody suddenly needed 5 years, which later in the 20th century slowly expanded to 10 years of this buffer zone before they could take on an adult life and adult responsibilities. There is no such thing as an adolescent.
If I may interject for just a moment. In the introductory montage of Peace Revolution 88, you can hear the Canadian, I think of him as British, Marshall McLuhan, the media expert. He's famous for The Medium as a Message and a couple other books on the trivium and such things. The idea is that they're discerning in the clip that I included. So it's a McLuhan and a couple other dudes, and they're making this point that book culture was book was the machine through which we learned. Freedom in Latin is liber. Liber means free and book. So freedom comes from the same word as book in the culture of 2,000 years ago. It was like that up until the medium of radio. So people were learning through books and books only, and then radio comes along, now they're listening, then TV comes along, and now they're watching. And so around this time, they create this term teenager. So it was a marked change, and you can listen for yourself because I'm doing a not so good job of paraphrasing it, but it's a marked change between the adolescent who's seeking to develop themselves in a unique way, to develop self-reliance, self-confidence, and self-esteem from within through internal experiences, as opposed to the tech culture, which means you have to buy the new device so that you can be with it, which is with the crowd, which is collectivism. So from the book culture of learning by yourself in solitude, you go to this tech culture where everyone's being programmed with the same thing. Now, true, there were limited books back in the day and whatnot, but when you take it to today, if we had a book culture today with the amount of data that's available out there, we'd be increasingly moving toward freedom every day, that we're not being programmed unwittingly by all these things that they're creating.
So, Thomas Edison, Ben Franklin, these guys had started their own businesses at young ages. That's how they lived such productive lives. They had almost no time in their life was like, oh, I need to get a job, so I better jump through some hoops so I can participate in someone else's dream. It was about, from a very young age, people in America were writing their own scripts and figuring out, hey, how can I bring value and provide some sort of service or a product that embodies that to my neighbors? And that's the origin of capitalism as its free state before it became all, regulated and, contorted and, given a bad name. So free voluntary trade between individuals is what I was referring to right there.
This is a slightly different perspective, Ernie, but it relates to what Rich said. There's a book by Robert Epstein. It's called The Case Against Adolescence. And it is basically what I said, that, trapping people who nature is telling them, hey, you're an adult now, look at you, in this childhood purgatory that needs to continue for years beyond that, had motivations beyond what we've already covered. One was, labor in the early 20th century. Get these people who will work for cheaper into the schools where there's already all kinds of social engineering and scientific management projects going on, and keep them away from the workforce where they're going to be competitive and drive down wages. And, that was a project that it's quite a spider web. When you look at the social engineering projects of the early 20th century, which, we could certainly talk about for hours, and Rich and I have in the past, it's very multifaceted.
The one thing that I would add to that is the mindset, and it's not just politics, it's in everything. Once you start to question, things, you go, I call BS on this. Well, they don't have to convince you if they can just confuse you. I mean, it gets to the point to where you're blaming your neighbor, like for who gets elected. In 2008, I mean, that definitely told everybody you got Obama or McCain to pick from. I mean, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know. And so when you do that, they go, well, why vote for the lesser of evil? Hell, just have the most evil thing, vote for evil. I mean, heck, what's the difference, So my point is that they want to blame your neighbor. You'll go, you're awake, what's going on. So obviously all the other people are too stupid. Well, I never bought into that. I don't think that people are that dumb. I mean, they maybe as a collective, they were getting blamed for being dumb. But I just don't think when you give them the kind of information that, both you, Brett, and Richard do, it's with that information you're going, I can make a decision. So why do we have these bad politicians, these bad policies, and this bad global effort to rule everybody is on the same plantation? And it's because they try to convince you, you may know, but nobody else does. Well, that means you have to have faith in the accuracy of the election process to begin with. And it eliminates all kinds of opportunities you may have with, other campaigns and candidates that you might get to vote for. And then you got to worry about whether it's even accurate. So I started off my activism. I ran for Secretary of State here in Arizona in 94 and 06. 94 was, look, man, I can see what's coming with the electronic voting, and we detailed a bunch of stuff. And by 06, it became very obvious here in Arizona. There was a lot of controversy over some election fraud and so on. So we're just going, look, is this, you get it now? Are you done? Well, a lot of people aren't, but a lot of people are. They're just not. I'm interested to see what kind of participation electoral process is going to be, even with, Dr. Paul's son involved. My win would be, we don't care, and we're on to the next thing. So that's what I'm hoping we can talk about. What's the next thing? What's the next phase of this? Because my 25 years in doing this has always been, man, if we could ever get to where people know what we know. I mean, take a look. I mean, oh my goodness, this is really bad. It's industrial steroid bad. And when they start to realize that, okay, the solution is what? What do you think?
Well, that leads to the third topic that we were going to discuss today. Part of it is on us, right? We are three people, let's start like this, who have proven that we're committed to what we're doing. And at this point, we're pretty much here to stay. We've invested a lot in this. I never, like I said before, I never want to use the word sacrifice, but we've moved beyond. at this point a lot of other opportunities that were available to us to.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.
To secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of scientific cast.